Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Learn English with Stories. I'm your host, David, and today we're diving into a profound story titled The Jar of Priorities. This story is more than just a metaphor for time management. It's a lens through which we can view our lives and reassess what truly matters. So, grab a warm cup of tea, relax, and let's explore this timeless lesson together. It was a bright morning in a bustling university town. The campus was alive with the chatter of students and the rustling of papers. Among the vibrant energy of the school was Professor Matthews, a philosophy lecturer known for his unique teaching style. His classes were always packed, not because they were easy, but because they left students with life-changing insights. That particular morning, the lecture hall was filled with eager students. The room buzzed with anticipation, as word had spread that Professor Matthews had prepared something special for the day. When he entered, the room fell silent. He carried a large glass jar, a bag of large rocks, a pouch of small pebbles, and a container of sand. The students exchanged curious glances, wondering what he was up to. Professor Matthews placed the jar on the desk and addressed the class. Today, we're going to learn about priorities. But instead of telling you what they are, I'll show you. He picked up the large rocks and began placing them into the jar one by one. The rocks were irregular in shape, but large enough to fill most of the jar. Once he could fit no more, he turned to the class. "Is the jar full?" he asked. The students, after examining the jar, nodded in agreement. "Yes, Professor, it's full," someone replied confidently. Without a word, Professor Matthews opened the pouch of pebbles. He poured them into the jar, shaking it gently so the pebbles settled into the spaces between the rocks. "How about now?" he asked again. The students hesitated, but a few spoke up. "Yes, now it's really full." Smiling, the professor picked up the container of sand. As he poured it into the jar, the fine grains flowed around the rocks and pebbles, filling every tiny crevice. "What do you think now?" he asked, a playful tone in his voice. The class erupted in laughter. "Okay, now it's definitely full," a student quipped. Professor Matthews placed the jar down and surveyed the room. "This jar," he began, "represents your life. The rocks are the truly important things, your family, health, and dreams. If you lost everything else but still had these, your life would remain meaningful." He gestured to the pebbles. "These are the smaller but still significant things. Your job, friendships, hobbies. They bring variety and joy but aren't as critical as the rocks." Finally, he pointed to the sand. "And this?" The sand represents all the small, trivial things. Social media, gossip, distractions. Notice how, if you fill the jar with sand first, there's no room for the rocks or pebbles. Prioritize wisely. The students began to exchange whispers, clearly intrigued by the simplicity yet depth of the demonstration. To make the lesson more relatable, Professor Matthews decided to elaborate further. "Let me give you a real-world example," he said, pointing at a student in the front row. "Lisa, tell me, what's something important to you that you often feel you don't have time for?" Lisa hesitated but finally replied, "Spending time with my family. I always feel like schoolwork and part-time jobs take over my life." Professor Matthews nodded. "Exactly. Now imagine if your jar is filled with sand, like social media scrolling or binge-watching shows. When you finally think about your family, there's no space left for them." He paused for a moment, letting the idea sink in. "That's why you must start with the rocks. Schedule family time first. Build everything else around that. It's not easy, but it's the only way to ensure that what matters most is never neglected. A student from the back raised his hand. Professor, what about balance? Sometimes it feels like everything is important. How do you choose your rocks? Professor Matthews smiled. Good question. Think of your rocks as the things that, if they were gone, would leave you feeling incomplete. For me, it's my health, my family, and my passion for teaching. Those are my non-negotiables. You need to identify yours. To further clarify, Professor Matthews began recounting a story about a friend named Jonathan. Jonathan was a workaholic, he began. He spent years climbing the corporate ladder, believing that success would bring him happiness. But in his pursuit, he neglected his health, skipped family dinners, and missed out on his children's milestones. Jonathan's breaking point came when he was hospitalized due to stress-related health issues. Lying in that hospital bed, he realized that he had been filling his jar with sand. It was a hard lesson, Professor Matthews admitted, but Jonathan used it as a wake-up call. He started prioritizing his health, spending quality time with his family, and scaling back on work. He didn't stop being successful, but he redefined what success meant to him. The room was silent as the students absorbed the weight of the story. Another student, Emma, raised her hand. But Professor, she said hesitantly, what if you don't know what your rocks are? Professor Matthews nodded thoughtfully. That's a common challenge, Emma. Discovering your rocks requires introspection. Ask yourself, what are the things you would fight to protect? What brings you the most joy and fulfillment? And what, if lost, would leave a void in your life? He encouraged the students to take time that evening to reflect on these questions and write down their answers. It's an exercise in self-awareness, he said. The more you understand yourself, the clearer your rocks become. To make the exercise more engaging, he shared another example. Take Sarah, a former student of mine. Sarah was passionate about art, but had pushed it aside to focus on a more practical career in finance. She was miserable. When she identified art as one of her rocks, she began to integrate it back into her life. She didn't quit her job immediately, but she started painting in her free time and eventually transitioned to a career in design. Today, she's happier and more fulfilled than ever. By now, the lecture had extended well beyond its scheduled time, but not a single student stirred. They were captivated, eager to learn more about applying these lessons to their own lives. Professor Matthews ended the session with a powerful statement. Life is a series of choices. Your jar will only hold so much. Fill it with the right things. The applause that followed was thunderous. The students left, many of them carrying their newfound understanding into the world beyond the lecture hall. The story of the jar of priorities is a timeless reminder to focus on what truly matters. Life is full of distractions, but when we prioritize the most important things, our rocks, everything else falls into place. Remember, the jar of life is finite. What you choose to fill it with defines its meaning. As you listen to this story, think about your own life. What are your rocks? Are they getting the attention they deserve? Reflect on how you can rearrange your priorities to create a life that feels balanced and meaningful. Learning English is a lot like this story. Focus on the rocks of language learning, foundational skills like listening, vocabulary, and grammar. Once you master these, the pebbles and sand of fluency will follow naturally. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might benefit from this message. Your support helps us continue to create educational and inspiring content. Thank you for spending time with me, David. Until next time, remember to focus on what truly matters. Goodbye, and take care.